She's a widowed alien, and her eyes only follow me after work hours. The job listing had promised modest hazard pay and opportunity for interspecies collaboration. Jared Marlowe had taken that to mean getting yelled at by a Martian supervisor over the occasional coolant leak, not orbital graveyard shifts with a boss who never blinked. It started on a Thursday, or something like Thursday. Time was strange on Exos Orbital Hub 9A, orbiting Saturn at a graceful, bureaucratically approved crawl. The artificial day cycles were set to a 27-hour rhythm, presumably to make sure no one ever adjusted properly. Jared's internal clock had given up halfway through week 1 and now operated on a complex emotional algorithm that factored in caffeine intake, lunch breaks, and the number of times he'd stared into space, wondering if he could survive being fired out an airlock. He was on pipe recalibration duty when he first met her. "Mr. Marlowe," came a voice behind him, soft but with the weight of someone who could override your security clearance with a blink. "You're holding the mag drill backwards." He turned. There she was, Ira, night shift supervisor, the widow queen, of maintenance, as the texts called her, when they thought she wasn't listening. Tall, hair dark as the space between stars, uniform crisp despite the station's humidity cycle doing its best to wrinkle everything. And those ears, elegant, upward, swept, just barely poking through her hair, like antennae tuned to a frequency no human could hear. "Oh," Jared said, eloquent as ever. "That explains why it screamed at me." She did not smile. Not exactly, but the corner of her mouth twitched. "The mag drill doesn't scream. It gives a warning chirp. If it screamed, we'd all be very dead." "Noted," he said sheepishly, flipping the tool the right way. "I'm still getting used to the unique joys of orbital plumbing." She handed him a second tool, a micro-sealant injector, and knelt beside the console. "You've been transferred to night rotation, effective immediately." "Elaborate," she said, leaning against the console, arms crossed. "Well, they replaced handcuffs with magnet tethers, donuts with nutrient cubes, and added a tentacle crime lord. Named Larry. Larry is statistically the most competent character," she noted. "That's because Larry has 8 arms and nothing to lose," Jared muttered, pressing play. For the next hour, the sound of old digital explosions and bad one-liners filled the maintenance deck. Era watched with something like fascination, her gaze flicking between the screen and Jared's face, as if gauging the reaction of a lab subject exposed to ancient meme culture. "You're enjoying this," he said. "I'm studying you. That's worse. I find your nostalgia for terrible storytelling endearing." He mock-gasped. "Did you just call me endearing?" "No," she said. "I called your poor taste in narrative structure endearing. You remain baffling." He gave her a look, then tapped the screen. "Okay, but you have to admit Larry's monologue in episode 6 was pretty solid. He references a cephalopod uprising against bureaucratic oppression. It was unexpectedly poignant." Jared chuckled, then realized they'd both leaned closer, their shoulders nearly touching. Neither of them moved. Then the lights flickered. He looked up. "That's not the usual flicker." "No," she said, tapping at the console. "That's a Class 3 resonance. Surge, magnetic field is destabilizing. Should I be worried?" She didn't answer. Instead, she snapped her fingers toward the wall. "Toolkit, now!" Jared grabbed it, handing it to her as the floor shuddered beneath them. Not violently, just a subtle sway, like the station was suddenly trying to remember how inertia worked. "Power fluctuation in the docking bay stabilization grid," Era said. "If it fails, the whole sector might tilt 30 degrees off axis." "I didn't know space could he said. "Is this because I used the espresso synth to boil ramen?" That was a factor. She looked at him. Her eyes were the color of frozen iron. "But mostly because you don't talk as much as the others." Jared was about to object when he realized she was technically complimenting him. He cleared his throat and nodded. "I will endeavor to remain tastefully silent." She blinked once, slowly, then stood and turned on her heel. "Night shift begins at 3 a.m. station time. Report to maintenance deck Delta. I'll be there. And she was. Every night she arrived before him, left after him, never without a data. Never without synth brew. 2 cups, one for her, one left sitting just off-center on the shared desk, as if she wasn't going to assume but still hoped. Jared learned fast. How to monitor fluidic pressure regulators without losing toes. How to recalibrate gravity anchors during solar flares. How to nod when Era talked about Lavari vacuum architecture like it was the weather. And how to laugh at her dry, deeply subtle jokes that usually came halfway through a 2 a.m. hull inspection and sounded suspiciously like deadpan existential commentary. "Do you ever sleep?" he asked once, midway through an auxiliary vent cleaning that smelled suspiciously like burnt seaweed. "Lavari rest differently," she said, standing at the edge of the maintenance bay with her arms folded. "Our bodies cycle through waking stasis, micro-dreams, like sipping sleep instead of gulping it." "That explains the staring," Jared muttered. "I heard that," she replied, a ghost of amusement in her voice. Their routine formed quickly. She never ordered him around, just suggested things with the kind of voice that made you want to impress her. He stopped asking questions like, "Why are we working in 0G for a rusted valve?" And Dern started asking things like, "Want me to run diagnostics on Sector E again? Or shall we gamble with fate and exploding pipes?" She always chose fate, but she always watched over his shoulder. He once joked that she had a 6th sense for imminent mechanical failure. She replied that she didn't, just very good ears. "I can hear stress fractures in alloy," she said, tapping the curved point of her left ear. "Tension reverberates. You'd be amazed how loud metal anxiety is. That's actually really cool. Coolness is not a Lavari priority," she said. "Stability is." "Still," Jared said, tapping his wrench on a bulkhead, "I think your ears might be smarter than me." She gave him a long look. They certainly don't boil ramen in espresso machines. They'd been working together for 3 weeks when she asked about Earth. Not directly. Ira never spoke directly unless it was a matter of life support systems or safety, but she mentioned how humans always seem slightly off-kilter in low orbit, like fish trying to walk. "Some of us are more flopping than walking," Jared replied. "I once got lost in my own apartment back home." "That's concerning." "It was during a blackout, and I was very drunk." Less concerning, but still tragic. He told her about cities, about the smells, the noise, the chaos of Earth life. She listened intently, her expression unreadable, her hands never still, always tapping through data, monitoring systems, adjusting things he couldn't see. "You miss it?" she asked once. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I don't really fit down there. Too much noise, too many people pretending they don't want to scream." She nodded slowly. "You fit better here." He shrugged. "The station may be cold and metallic, but at least it doesn't pretend to be anything else." She seemed to like that. After that she started lingering more, not in a weird way, just longer after reports were filed, after systems were checked, after the rest of the station powered down into its quiet, humming sleep. Sometimes they just sat at the console, sipping terrible synth brew in silence, listening to the sound of Saturn's radiation belt singing through the hull. Once the lights dimmed and stayed that way for an extra hour. Neither of them moved. Jared realized he didn't mind the quiet so much anymore, not with her sitting there, quietly recalibrating his understanding of loneliness. They didn't talk about feelings, or the fact that she was still technically listed as married in the crew directory, or that Jared had started dreaming in shades of silver and blue. They talked about starship hull alloys, about the philosophical implications of automated janitorial drones, about whether zero-gravity pizza would taste better or worse than the frozen variety served in the galley. It was worse. Much worse. "The cheese has migrated," Era said, examining the floating glob with professional horror. Jared laughed so hard he nearly choked on his drink. He didn't tell her then that he was staying on past his contract, that he'd declined a position on Earth, that his reasons all started and ended with the woman sitting across from him reading thermal diagnostics like they were bedtime stories. He figured there was time. They had nights and synth brew and the gentle creaking song of a space station that never quite slept. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Jared decided to stop pretending time made any sense. At some point he gave up his wrist chrono and started measuring shifts in units of synth brew cups until Era said something mildly threatening. The record was 7. That night, a rogue sanitation bot had tried to assimilate a cleaning trolley. Era had folded her arms, watched the mess unfold, and said, "If it eats the mop bucket, we leave it in an airlock." He was halfway through cup number 3 when Era handed him a data slate without a word. "More duct reports?" he asked. "No," she said. "This is entertainment." He raised an eyebrow. "Maintenance supervisor comedy hour?" "Simulation archive," she replied. "I thought you might enjoy observing the trajectory of humanity's self-image through low-budget media." He scrolled. "You gave me Earth sitcoms?" She sighed, reached up and slapped a cable out of his hand. "That one!" With a curse, he yanked it. A shower of harmless-looking blue sparks danced over his knuckles. The panel went dark. Then the station stopped humming. "Is that good?" She tapped. A sequence into the secondary screen. A faint whir returned, less a purr, more a groan, but it was life. "For now," she said, standing up. "The grid will hold. I need to run a diagnostic, though. Alone." Jared blinked. "Alone?" She hesitated. "It's a Lavari subsystem, sensitive to external resonance, meaning my very human vibes might mess it up." "Your clumsiness might," she said. "Also your tendency to sing when nervous. That happened once, and it was Bohemian Rhapsody." She offered the faintest ghost of a smirk. "You only got halfway through before the tool chest fell on you." That tool chest was booby-trapped by gravity. He stayed behind, watching as she disappeared into the narrow crawl space that accessed the resonance core. It was strange how empty the room felt the moment she was gone. He found a bench and sat, fidgeting with a broken cable end. 5 minutes, 10, 20. He'd just started humming softly when her voice echoed from the corridor. "You're singing again." He jumped. "How do you do that?" "I hear vibrations," she said, emerging with her hands smudged and her expression unreadable. "Yours are particularly enthusiastic. You mean soulful. I mean pitch-averse." They returned to the maintenance deck. The tension was fading, but not entirely gone. She didn't sit, just hovered near the viewport, staring out at Saturn's pale glow. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but too slowly. "I don't like anomalies," she said at last. "Unstable fields, glitches, they make things unpredictable." Jared folded his arms. "So you're not a fan of chaos. Got it. I'll cancel the juggling clown I hired." She turned her head. "You're joking." "I'm only mostly joking." Silence, then, "I've never seen a clown." He blinked. "Oh, wow. You've really dodged a cultural bullet." "I have seen war," she said too flatly. He winced. "Yeah, sorry, that escalated." She shook her head. "You don't need to apologize. Humor is unfamiliar terrain, but I like how you navigate it. That's the nicest thing anyone said about my dumb jokes." "I didn't say they were good. I said I liked your attempt." He grinned. "High praise from the queen of unintentional sarcasm." She finally sat, reached for her cup. "Perhaps we are both anomalies, unstable and unpredictable." "Exactly." They drank. In companionable silence, the station resumed its soft, mechanical heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a drone began humming again, this time a wobbly rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." Jared leaned back and sighed. "Think Larry would have handled that power surge better." "Larry would have weaponized it," she said. then made a speech about the tyranny of weak wiring, Jared chuckled. He really is the hero we don't deserve. They sat there a while longer, two figures in a quiet deck orbiting a gas giant, sipping reconstituted coffee while the stars blinked in silent approval. And in that silence, something settled, something wordless and slow and very much still forming. Neither of them said it, but they didn't need to. The thing about spending consecutive weeks working orbital night shifts with a mysterious alien woman who never slept, rarely blinked, and could disassemble a reactor core with a butter knife, if sufficiently annoyed, was that reality started to bend. Not dramatically, just at the edges. It began when Jared started dreaming in systems diagnostics. Not metaphorically. He literally had a dream where he walked into his old high school cafeteria and the lunch lady handed him a power relay schematic instead of mashed potatoes. She'd worn Era's ears. He woke up confused, caffeinated himself to safety, and made the mistake of telling her during maintenance rounds. "You were in my dream," he said halfway through rebooting a grab stabilizer. "But also you were handing out broccoli and yelling about oxygen efficiency." "Logical combination," she replied without looking up. "Broccoli has questionable value. Oxygen does not. Should I be concerned? Only if the broccoli was armed. That night, she handed him a sealed container during the third coffee break. Inside was a single, suspiciously vibrant green vegetable. "I had it printed by the food replicator," she said. "You printed me dream broccoli? Consider it a preventative measure." He chuckled, then blinked. "Wait, is this edible?" "Technically, but I disabled flavor protocols." He put the lid back on. "It's a threat. You've given me edible threats. I find them more effective than written warnings." The station's mood shifted subtly that week. Nothing official, no red alerts, no broadcasted. Drama, but Jared could sense it. The walls vibrated differently. Drones moved a little faster. The silence between system checks grew too dense. He caught Era lingering over logs she never used to check twice, her fingers hovering just above the console like she was waiting for it to say something incriminating. He didn't push her. Not. At first, she wasn't the kind of person you cornered with concern, more the type you handed a backup capacitor and hoped she'd take the hint. So he left an extra mug of synth brew at her station one night, labeled in marker, "For when the creeping dread sets in." Beneath that, a hand-drawn doodle of a sad power conduit. When she arrived, she stared at it for a solid 20 seconds, then drank it in silence. "Something's up, isn't it?" he asked later, while elbow-deep in the coolant grid. Era didn't look away from her screen. "There are irregular fluctuations in the station's exterior shielding. Cosmic radiation, irregular, number-patterned. Intentional? Sabotage?" She paused. "Not yet." The word "yet" sat in the air like an unexploded mine. They ran double shifts. Not because they were told to, no one told Era anything, but because neither of them wanted to leave the systems alone too long. Jared's dreams got weirder. Once, he imagined the station's artificial intelligence, who didn't exist, offering him relationship advice while polishing a laser cutter. "You should be honest," said the dream AI, patting his shoulder. "Before she reroutes your heart to the emergency recycling vent." In the real world, he began to notice things, small things. Era's hands trembled once while disconnecting a terminal, only slightly, and only for a moment, but it was the kind of thing she didn't allow. He didn't mention it. Instead, he tripped over a misplaced toolbox and invented a dramatic limp to distract her. "You look like a malfunctioning evacuation dummy," she said flatly. "I'm method acting," he replied, "for my upcoming role as man who stepped on his own dignity." "You're excelling." But the crack in her calm stayed with him. The next night, they were calibrating a magnetic anchor when the alert chimed. Not a full alarm, just a 3-tone ripple that meant, "Please investigate this before something explodes, but no rush unless you enjoy surprise decompression." Jared followed her to the upper corridor near Sector H, an area he jokingly referred to as the haunted hallway, due to its chronic flickering lights and faint hums that suspiciously resembled whispers. When they reached the access panel, Aira froze. Someone had already been there. The panel was ajar, not ripped open, not obviously tampered with, but tools had moved, fasteners misaligned, and the diagnostic cable was missing. Like someone knew what to take without making a mess. She knelt slowly. "Do not touch anything." "I wasn't planning to," Jared said, backing up. "This screams, 'Don't poke the bear.' The bear is probably electrified." She tapped into the logs, fingers faster than usual, her eyes narrowed. "No breach protocols triggered," she murmured. "No external contact detected. But this subsystem, this shouldn't be active. What is it?" She didn't answer immediately, just stood and closed the panel, then turned to him with an unreadable look. "Hypothetically," she said, "if someone wanted to install a covert relay to scan outbound communications without alerting station protocols, this is where they'd do it." "Hypothetically," he echoed. "And who's the hypothetical someone?" "That's the question." They filed a low-priority anomaly report, enough to log it, not enough to attract command-level eyes. Jared asked why. She didn't answer. Later, during one of their increasingly familiar, quiet, not-talking sessions, he finally worked up the courage. "Was your husband Lavari?" he asked, pretending not to watch her reaction. A pause. "He was military." She nodded once. "We met during the Centauri Buffer War, the one with the fusion mines and the cannibal diplomats." He blinked. "I feel like that part was glossed over in the history vids." "It usually is." She didn't elaborate, just sat there quietly, inspecting the stars like they were suspects. "I don't know how to ask this politely," Jared said after a long pause. "So I'm just going to ask, is what's happening now connected to him?" She exhaled, not a sigh, something closer to a calculation. "Before he died," she said, "he warned me that peace was always a temporary variable. That's certain. Interests would reignite conflict if left unsupervised. And you think those interests are poking around the station now?" "I think we're orbiting a planet that sees a lot of classified traffic, and some of that traffic may not be accounted for." Jared sat back. "Well, that's great. Super relaxing. I didn't tell you to alarm you. You did not tell me not to, either." She offered him a look. "Would you prefer ignorance?" "I mean, yes, but then I'd still be drinking bad coffee and talking to my toaster for company." "You speak to your toaster?" "It's very receptive, unlike the food replicator, which keeps giving me oddly shaped pudding." "That's because you selected the experimental textures option. I thought it was a new flavor. It's a test of character." The tension broke just a little, enough to let the silence feel comfortable again. Jared looked at her hands, as still and steady now as ever, still sharp, but something lived behind them. Not panic, something colder, like a plan already unfolding. And for the first time since he'd met her, he realized that whatever was coming, she wasn't just going to fix it. She was going to fight it, with or without him, which meant he had a decision to make, and probably a few more dreams about broccoli. By the third night after the sabotage incident, Jared was starting to suspect the station was gaslighting him. Hallway lights flickered when he passed. Drones that used to ignore him now rotated slightly, as if just remembering they had cameras. Even the coffee dispenser began asking him to state clearance level before grudgingly dispensing the same awful sludge. He started naming his coffee cups just to feel in control. The current one was Commander Frothington. Aira, as usual, was unbothered. She moved through the corridors like the ship was an extension of her nervous system, scanning logs, reviewing encryption packets, and casually rewriting half the maintenance. Security routines, without breaking stride. Jared followed, occasionally useful, mostly offering moral support in the form of sarcastic commentary and energy tablets that were, in his words, only mildly irradiated. "I ran a trace on the rogue comm relay," she said as they stepped into the auxiliary data core. "Did it confess to anything juicy?" "No," she replied, "but its routing protocols suggest external influence." "So we're dealing with a spy relay? A mole module? A—" "Sneaky packet peeper, you're enjoying this far too much. Just let me have my moment, Era. I never got to be a space detective. You still haven't. You're an underqualified technician with a caffeine dependency in a questionable relationship with inanimate objects. I prefer charmingly over-enthusiastic amateur." She crouched next to the core access panel, slid it open, and began tapping commands into the embedded terminal. Lights blinked to life in soft pulses, echoing like breath. Jared hovered behind her, trying not to touch anything that might explode. "So hypothetically," he said, "if someone was spying through this relay, what would they want? Traffic logs? Docking clearance patterns? Command-level memos? We don't have any of those, which is why I suspect the spy isn't after the station." He blinked. "Then what?" "They're watching me." Silence stretched out between them like a vacuum. Jared opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Okay," he said slowly. "So just to clarify, you're being stalked by an interstellar intelligence operation, and your plan is to quietly rewire the security grid while hiding in a broom closet with me?" "I'm adapting to uncertainty. Can I just say your poker face is phenomenal? Really, I've seen statues blink more." She stood, dusted off her hands, and gave him a glance that wasn't quite annoyed, but wasn't exactly patient either. "I survived 2 war fronts and an assassination attempt in 0G, she said. "I can survive being watched." "Right, but you don't have to do it alone." He meant it. He really meant it. But part of him, the part that still remembered tripping over his own feet in the artificial gravity chamber, was unsure how much help he could offer someone who once disarmed a photon grenade with her elbow. "You already are helping," she said. He looked surprised. "Seriously, you're a constant variable, unpredictable but present. Are you saying I'm basically station furniture?" "No, you're significantly more talkative." Jared grinned, but his mind was racing. If Elra was being watched, by whom? Why now? And what would they do if they realized she was onto them? Before he could ask, a sudden tremor ran through the deck. Not a full quake, just a pulse, like the station had hiccuped. Elra whipped out her wrist scanner. Not natural. Could have fooled me. That was very nature's revenge feeling. She scanned the ceiling. Localized gravity fluctuation. Power redirection through a subgrid that doesn't exist. Well, that's comforting. Phantom grids. Love those. Do we also get imaginary friends? She took off toward the corridor without answering. Jared jogged after her, already regretting the 4th coffee. They passed maintenance decks, storage pods, and a small hydroponics chamber that was now suspiciously overgrown with vines. "Has the spinach always looked carnivorous?" he asked as they passed. "I rerouted nutrient flow. Growth rates accelerated." "So it's normal that the lettuce tried to grab me?" "You're not its usual diet." They reached an access tunnel, rarely used except according to the schematics. It wasn't supposed to exist. Elra crouched, examined the hatch, and pulled out a small black tool Jared had never seen before. "Is that a weapon?" "No, it's a code key emulator. It looks like a weapon. It is also a weapon." She slid it into the panel and twisted. The hatch hissed open, revealing a passage full of blinking, unauthorized conduits. Jared exhaled. Oh, good. Secret tunnels. Because nothing says safe like hidden infrastructure built by strangers. Elra entered first. He followed, trying not to think about sci-fi horror films with rooms just like this. The tunnel pulsed faintly, warm and wrong. Halfway through, she stopped. There, embedded in the far wall, was a device he didn't recognize. A low, humming, oblong piece of tech, glowing faint violet and wrapped in shielding that definitely wasn't. "Standard issue," Elra frowned. "This is advanced." Jared peered closer. "What's it do?" She hesitated. It mimics sensor feedback, generates false environmental stability signatures. So it's lying to the station? Yes. And allowing movement through areas we think are sealed. Okay, so someone's sneaking around using tech that fools even your diagnostics. That's not terrifying. And all, she reached toward the device and it flared, just once, a pulse of light, a quiet, cold shimmer. Back, she said sharply. Jared moved instantly. What is it? Recognition scan. For you? For us. They bolted. No dramatic explosion followed, no lockdown, just a return to quiet. Too quiet. When they emerged back into the main corridor, it felt like stepping out of a dream into another one. A more dangerous one. Elra sealed the tunnel. We need to mislead them, she said. Let me guess, with more broccoli? Worse. Bureaucracy. He winced. You're going to drown them in fake reports and reroute sensor feedback loops. If they're using our data, we'll make the data lie. Spying on a spy. I like it. She paused, then glanced at him. Jared, if I tell you to run, I won't. You may need to. And you may need someone who knows how to distract hostile agents with improvised karaoke. That got her. Just a twitch of a smile. We'll need a distraction protocol, she said. He tapped his chest. Already programmed. Operation Loud and Clumsy. Elra didn't reply, but when she turned back to the console, her shoulders were just slightly less tense. Jared sat beside her, watching, waiting, ready, or at least ready enough. Whatever came next, they weren't alone. And if he had to rewrite the station's anthem into interpretive dance to keep it that way, well, he'd start stretching. By morning, Cycle, the station's artificial lighting, had the gall to simulate a sunrise. Jared stood under the amber-tinted glow, holding his fourth mug of the day, Captain Buzzkill, and wondering if lighting simulations counted as emotional manipulation. Elra was 20 steps ahead of him, both literally and mentally. She had already reprogrammed 3 of the station's monitoring protocols, hacked the environmental stabilizers in Sector E to run feedback loops, and somehow found the time to update the snack vending unit to offer options that didn't resemble asteroid pebbles. Jared celebrated this last act with cautious optimism and a bag of crunch-enhanced pseudo-corn. Are you planning to replace the entire diagnostics network? He asked, chewing loudly. If necessary, she said without looking up. The decoy parameters must be consistent. So we're building a ghost station. Yes, one that will appear stable and uninteresting, just like my dating profile. You had a dating profile. I tried once. The algorithm matched me with a microwave. Elra raised a brow. That's not how matchmaking software works. Tell that to my microwave. It still won't toast anything unless I compliment it first. She blinked. You imprinted on your kitchen appliance? It's a long shift, Elra. We all cope in different ways. Her lips twitched, and for half a second Jared felt like he'd won a prize. He decided not to press his luck and turned back to the interface. They were using an old maintenance shell, one buried so deep in the system's architecture that only a handful of long-retired engineers probably remembered it existed. That made it the perfect hiding place. Elra mapped out false telemetry feeds and sensor shadows. Jared watched, amazed. Okay, he said after a while, rubbing his eyes. So once this fake station is running, the spy snoops will think everything's peachy until we catch them. And how do we do that? We bait them. Of course we do. And let me guess, I'm the bait. You volunteered. I did not. Silence is consent in most interstellar languages. That seems legally dubious. You'll be fine. You're unpredictable. I'm starting to think that's not always a compliment. The plan was equal parts brilliant and insane. Elra would continue leaking controlled anomalies through the fake data stream, something just juicy enough to tempt whoever was watching. Meanwhile, Jared would act normal in this case, meaning his usual blend of hapless optimism, rambling humor, and accidental competence. If the observers took the bait, they might try to make contact, and when they did, Elra would be ready. Jared wasn't entirely sure how she'd be ready, but she'd spent half the previous cycle building something that looked suspiciously like a collapsible pulse net hidden inside a floor panel. He chose not to ask. It seemed safer that way. Later that shift, Jared found himself alone in the mess hall, nibbling on a sandwich that had the texture of neoprene and the flavor profile of salt with aspirations. He was halfway through composing a limerick about existential dread when a voice interrupted. "You're sitting in my spot." He looked up. A crewman he didn't recognize stood in the doorway. Mid-30s, standard uniform, regulation haircut, eyes a little too still. Jared smiled. "Oh, sorry, didn't see your name on it. Is this the designated melancholy booth?" The man didn't laugh. "I haven't seen you around before." Jared gestured with his sandwich. "That's because I'm often hiding from dietary consequences." "What department? Are you in?" "Logistics. Funny, I thought I knew everyone in logistics. I transfer in and out, like a ghost." "Or bad coffee." Another pause. The crewman sat across from him. "You seem very casual." "It's my superpower. If I'm ever in danger, I confuse my enemies with charm and snack crumbs." The man didn't react. Jared's smile faded a fraction. "Something I can help you with?" he asked. "Just observing." "Ah, well, if you're observing how I'm eating this sandwich, I'd rate myself a solid 6. Points deducted for structural integrity." The crewman stood up. "Nice talking to you." And just like that, he was gone. Jared waited a few seconds, then reached under the table and pressed a small button Elra had installed that pinged her comm silently. She arrived 6 minutes later, scanning as she walked. "Got him," she murmured. "Who is he?" "Not on the crew manifest, not on any transfer logs, and his ID tag is a reused serial number from a destroyed transport. That seems ominous. He's not alone. Double ominous. They think they're ahead. Triple ominous. But they don't realize we've rewritten their copy of the station." Jared leaned back. "Okay, but how long can we keep the illusion up? Eventually they'll notice we're faking it." "Not if we give them something else to chase." "And what's that?" "My clearance." She tapped the screen between them and brought up a sealed data node. It was locked behind multiple levels of encryption Jared hadn't even known existed. "What is that?" "Insurance. Personal archive. Contains records my husband left behind from the war, from before." He suspected someone in the interstellar diplomatic corps was playing both sides. He never lived long enough to prove it. Jared stared. "And you think this is what they're after?" "I know it is." He exhaled. "So we're holding a live spark plug next to a fuel leak?" "No," she said calmly. "We're holding it over their heads." He whistled. "You know, I used to think you just wanted to micromanage my overtime." "I still do. But now you're using me as emotional. We'll cover while plotting revenge against an interstellar conspiracy. Multitasking." "Wow! My last boss just wanted a birthday card." Elra stood. "The moment they make a move, we lock the node, trace the access point and trap the relay. And then we invite them to explain themselves." "Jared," she said. "Interrogate is too polite." He shivered. "You're scary when you're calm. You're scared when I breathe too loudly." "Accurate." As they left the mess hall together, the lights flickered once, then stabilized. Jared glanced at the nearest drone. It was watching again. He nodded at it. "Let's keep dancing," he whispered, and the drone, if it understood, didn't object. The decoy station was officially in business. From the outside, it looked normal. Quiet hums of traffic logs, scheduled maintenance updates, reports about failing. Temperature regulators in the greenhouse. They were not failing, but now the spinach had developed an attitude. The fake alerts were cleverly mundane, just enough noise to lull the watchers into a pattern. Jared called it Operation Bore Them to death. Inside, though, reality had grown denser. You could feel it, like walking into a room just after a serious conversation. The corridors were quieter, drones seemed more hesitant, and Elra moved with that extra fraction of tension in her spine, like she expected the bulkheads to speak. Jared found her rewiring one of the primary junction hubs, elbow deep in cables, that looked suspiciously alive. Should I be worried that half those wires are glowing? They respond to electrical stress. Right, but they're glowing like they just heard gossip. She didn't pause. They're linked to the node's feedback system. I'm amplifying the resonance delay, I see. So techno gibberish for, we're still not getting caught? Yes. Jared leaned against the wall, sipping from a pouch of what claimed to be pineapple juice. It tasted like betrayal. I think the spinach is watching me now, he said. Elra glanced up. It only reacts to emotional fluctuations. I told you it was judging me. The hum of the station shifted subtly, so subtly that only someone like Elra would notice it instantly. Her eyes flicked upward. They're probing. Already. They're using the maintenance relay in the auxiliary wing. Smart, low traffic, limited, diagnostics. Is it weird that I'm kind of impressed? It's not weird, it's dangerous. Well, I wasn't going to write them a fan letter. She tapped something into her wrist console, and the lights dimmed by 5%. That was you, right? Jared asked, suddenly tense. Yes. I'm lowering the photonic filter. It will trigger an error loop in their relay. Ah, making them think we have bugs. We do. Bugs they don't know about. Elra didn't smile, but there was. A tiny shift in her expression, like a joke had almost landed and decided to take a connecting flight. They made their way to the observatory deck. The stars outside shimmered in irregular patterns, thanks to the station's shifting orbit. Jared stared out, thoughtful. Hey, Elra? Yes? Do you ever get tired of playing chess with invisible people? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved toward the viewport and stared out with him. Not tired, she said, just aware that even when I win, I lose something. Jared nodded. That was way more poetic than I expected. I was going to say I lose sleep and the ability to eat pudding without feeling watched. Both are valid. They stood like that for a moment, just two silhouettes against the glow of a distant gas giant, one sipping questionable juice, the other holding an entire conspiracy at arm's length. Then the emergency lighting snapped to red. Okay, Jared muttered. That one's not you, right? No, right. Definitely bad. They sprinted down the corridor as the alarm repeated its flat, unsettling tone. Elra accessed a control terminal mid-run, fingers dancing across the interface. They activated the backup core, she said. Who has access to that? Only 3 officers on file. One is dead, one is in cryosleep, and the third is me. Jared skidded to a halt. Well, that's a comforting list. They're not accessing data. They're redirecting power. To where? She didn't answer. She just turned on her heel and ran. When they reached the hydroponics bay, the answer was clear. A section of the wall had opened, revealing a long tunnel. Definitely not regulation. The lights inside were dim and pulsing, and the spinach was gone. They used the nutrient lines, Elra murmured. Jared gaped. Wait, the spinach was a decoy? No. The spinach is simply highly adaptive. I knew I shouldn't have talked to it. Elra knelt by the tunnel entrance, examining the wiring. She tapped into it, sending a burst signal upstream. The pulsing lights shifted in response. They're using biomass resonance, she said. Wait, like bioorganic signals? Yes, it's old tech, illegal in most systems. They're transmitting signals through living matter. So the spinach was listening? Elra stood. We can't trace it directly, but we can follow the resonance. She pulled a small device from her belt, a modified drone controller, now blinking with a strange green hue. Jared eyed it warily. That thing's not going to bite, is it? Only if you insult its programming. I never do that on a first date. They followed the signal into the lower decks, places Jared had only ever seen on station schematics. It smelled faintly of ozone and unwashed ambition. The walls were closer together, and the hum of machinery sounded almost anxious. They found the endpoint of the transmission nestled behind a panel near the old communications array. A small device was embedded there, slick, chrome, and quietly threatening. Looks like a portable relay worm, Elra said. Adaptive, smart, capable of mimicking station chatter. Jared peered at it. So it's like the high school mean girl of tech. Exactly. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a round object no bigger than a coin and pressed it against the relay. There was a faint click. Stasis loop, she said. It'll trap the worm's signal in a recursive loop. They'll think it's working, but all they're getting is yesterday's data. Jared blinked. That's genius. I have moments. They walked back in silence for a bit until Jared finally said, You know, it's weird. What is? All this, the spying, the sabotage, the fake data and midnight power reroutes. It somehow feels less complicated than my last relationship. Elra chuckled, actually chuckled, a rare, brief sound that made Jared grin. I'll take that. As a win, he said. You should. Back in their makeshift command room, Elra leaned over the console, entering new access codes. They'll notice the stasis loop eventually, she said. We have to be ready. Jared cracked his knuckles. Well, I just downloaded an ancient Terran dance protocol called the Robot, so emotionally, I'm already prepared. Good. I'll write it into the contingency plan. He raised his cup, Lieutenant Fishbar this time, and toasted the screen. To the weirdest overtime in the galaxy. And somehow the console lights pulsed once, like it agreed. The station had developed a subtle, twitchy personality. Lights flickered without rhythm. Doors took half a second too long to open, like they were thinking about it. And even the air recyclers made a sound that Jared had started calling mildly concerned breathing. He stood by the coffee synth, watching. The dispenser gurgle out something brownish that might be either coffee or bold misdirection. It's weird, he muttered. The machine knows my order, but every time it's like it forgets I have taste buds. Eldra appeared behind him, somehow managing to walk in complete silence, despite wearing boots with reinforced soles. Jared flinched and nearly dropped his drink. I'm not saying you need to wear a bell, he said, but I'd at least like some dramatic footsteps, maybe a theme song. Would you prefer one with bass or violin? I was thinking kazoo. Sets the right tone for the slow mental unraveling I'm experiencing. She raised one brow and turned to the dispenser. Try the violet button, the brown one. Is lying. He did. It was marginally better. Elra sipped her own synth tea, then tapped her console. We intercepted another signal this cycle. Let me guess. Through the ventilation system again? No, this time through the waste processor. Jared blinked. Please tell me that's metaphorical. It's not. They hid the signal in the pressure readings of decomposing organics. You're telling me we're being spied on by someone using space poop as a medium? Correct. I'm sorry, but if that's not espionage innovation, I don't know what is. Elra leaned over the console and ran a series of scans. They're escalating, quietly but deliberately. We're days away from a full breach attempt. Jared leaned back. How does a guy go from filing shipment manifests to being bait in a shadow war? You were already bait, she said. You just didn't have context. Great. It's always comforting when your boss tells you you've always been expendable. Not expendable. Expendable adjacent. I'll knit that on a pillow. Elra brought up a new set of schematics on the holo. Jared blinked. The layout looked familiar until he realized it was their station, duplicated. What is this? Our next move. She rotated the schematic. We build a second virtual overlay of the station, a ghost of the ghost. We loop all traffic, real and decoy, through it. Then create dummy clusters of activity across every deck. They'll have to divide their attention. You want to fake the station being more active? Yes, too active to pass. Jared squinted. So, we make the station look like it's doing jazz hands in every direction. That's absurd, and probably the best plan we've had. Elra gave him the schematic drive. You'll handle implementation. Of course. Nothing like a little light digital hallucination. To start the evening, he got to work, layering thermal echoes, signal ghosts, and power anomalies. He labeled one deck Dance Party Subtle, just to amuse himself. Another one, in honor of his increasingly fragile mental state, was Cry Closet Beta. Elra didn't say anything when she saw the names, just raised a slight brow and let it slide. When they activated the overlays, the station came alive in ways even Jared didn't expect. Drones changed routes, background noise shifted, and the fake personnel logs spun up so convincingly that one of the auto-maintenance bots tried to deliver mail to an engineer who hadn't existed since the year 2193. Okay, Jared said, marveling. I think we just created digital schizophrenia. It's working. The external pings have increased frequency. They're scrambling to match reality, which means they'll make a mistake soon. They monitored the situation from what Jared had dubbed the cool room, mostly because it had no real function, and also contained a busted vending machine that once launched a protein bar at his chest, like it was angry. Suddenly, the console beeped. Not a normal beep, a triumphant one. Elra's eyes narrowed. They're trying to establish a live link. Jared's heart jumped. To where? Deck 7. Secondary comms. They think it's a dead node. Is it? Not anymore. They sprinted. When they reached Deck 7, the quarter was dimly lit, quiet, but not empty. Jared could feel it. The air was too still, like it was holding its breath. Elra raised a hand and gestured silently. Jared watched as she moved to the panel and activated the intercept. The comm flickered. A face appeared. Male, humanoid, clean-shaven, unnervingly calm, like he'd practiced being reasonable in a mirror too often. He blinked slowly, smiled faintly, and said, "Lieutenant Elra, I believe we have common interests," Jared whispered. "That's how every supervillain conversation starts." Elra didn't react. "Name, clearance, purpose?" The man smiled wider. "No names, just intent. You're sitting on data that affects interstellar stability. We'd like it." Elra didn't blink. "Stability is subjective. Yours seems very nervous. You're not being rational. You sent probes through decomposing matter. That doesn't scream rationality." The man chuckled. "You've built quite the fortress here. Clever. Layers within layers. But eventually, every shell cracks." Jared leaned in. "Yeah, and when they do, something squishy falls out. Hope you're ready." The man's face darkened. "You failed to breach us directly, so now you're trying diplomacy? How quaint." "We're trying. To prevent a war. You mean a leak. If this data goes public, it could dismantle entire coalitions." "Good." The man narrowed his eyes. "You think truth is a weapon?" "No," Elra said. "I think lies are shields, and I don't like shields I didn't build." Static surged, and the transmission ended. Jared let out a breath. "So that went well." "They're desperate." "That makes them more dangerous." "Right, but also easier to trap?" "Yes, but also easier to trap." She handed Jared a new drive. "Next phase." He took it reluctantly. "You know, my mom always said I'd end up doing something important. I don't think..." She imagined I'd be running decoy programs while dodging political assassins. Elra allowed herself the ghost of a smile. She should be proud. Jared looked at the drive, sighed, and said, "All right, let's jazz hand the galaxy a little harder." Jared watched the station's lights pulse softly, the rhythmic glow a quiet heartbeat after a night that felt more like a lifetime. The emergency alarms were silent now, replaced by the familiar, steady hum of recycled air and whirring circuits, comforting in their constancy, if a bit predictable. He had grown used to this eerie calm, the kind that whispered of battles fought. in shadows, where victory was measured in microseconds and missed signals. Elra stood beside him, her posture relaxed in a way Jared had rarely seen since they first met, like the weight of unseen galaxies had lifted, even if just for a moment. The sharp angles of her elven ears caught the light, casting delicate shadows on her pale skin, a quiet reminder of the vast worlds between them and the complexities they'd faced together. "You're quiet," she said, breaking the silence with that precise tone she reserved for when she wanted something but was also mildly amused. "I'm just thinking, dangerous pastime." He smiled, holding his synth tea a little too tightly. "You know, I never expected overtime to come with interstellar espionage and bioorganic spies embedded in salad." "Nor did I," Elra admitted, her lips twitching. They turned toward the main console, where the last of their digital decoys danced in shimmering holograms, ghosts that had successfully outwitted the enemy probes. The opposing faction had withdrawn, their attempts thwarted by the layers of deception Elra and Jared had woven. The station was secure, at least for now. "Remember when I said I felt expendable?" Jared asked. "Yes. Turns out I was just misplaced." Elra arched a brow. "There's a difference?"